So my name is Dimitri Broxton. I am the Senior Director of Education here at MOAD, and this is in the Artist Studio. So ever since the pandemic started, I think we started this right in the first week of April, the museum has been closed to the public. And we're still going to be closed until October, just so you know. So we're going to continue doing this virtually for a while and probably after. But we wanted to make sure that even though the museum was closed, folks could get their fill of art and artists of the African diaspora. And so twice a month, my colleague and I, Elena Gross, visit some of our favorite artists in their studio to see what they've been working on for the last year. This is a really rare opportunity to be able to speak to artists directly in their studios, and I want to remind folks, because sometimes people forget, or if you're new, we always do an audience Q&A. So even though this is a webinar format, we want to hear from you. So throughout the conversation, please use the chat feature, and we will see that pop up. Also, in the last 15 minutes of the conversation, we will address audience Q&A. So as we're going through the conversation today, please use the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom, that little icon that says Q&A, and type in your questions, and I'll be sure to get to them in the last 15 minutes. If you've missed any of these episodes, if you arrive late, you can always see them on Museum of the African Diaspora's YouTube channel, as well as Facebook, where they're archived. This series was made possible by a generous donation by Westridge Foundation, also all of our MOAD members, and all of you who join each week and make donations. Thank you for enabling us to continue to do this for the last year and beyond. We couldn't do it without you, so thank you. I'm going to read a few statements before we get started into the conversation today. The first one is our commitment to Black Lives Matter. So MOAT stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Dante Wright, and most recently, Ma'Khia Bryant. I think actually there's a couple more since Ma'Khia Bryant, actually, unfortunately. We mourn all those who have lost their lives at the hands of police brutality and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. We also want to acknowledge that MOAD's commitment to racial justice is ongoing, and as such, we will continue to say their names to hold space and honor these victims. We also want to acknowledge the land that we are all collectively on at this moment, especially if you're joining from the United States. So many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those who were forcefully brought to this continent. Our institutions were founded upon exclusions and the erasures of the indigenous peoples whose lands we are located. With deep respect, MOAD acknowledges that even in the virtual space, our people, our work, and our network servers are on native lands, and we thank the indigenous peoples of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. For more information about the original inhabitants of the land that you currently occupy, please visit www.native-land.ca, and you can look up by just entering your zip code to see exactly which peoples were the original inhabitants, and you can find out other information about how you can get involved. Today, I am joined by the phenomenal artist, Helina Metaferia. Helina is an interdisciplinary artist working across collage, assemblage, video, performance, and social engagement. Metafaria received her MFA from Tufts University School of the Museum of Fine Arts and attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. Recent solo and group exhibitions include Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, New York University's the Gallatin Galleries in New York, Smack Mellon in Brooklyn, New York, Modern Art Museum, Gebre Kristos Desta Center in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Alabama Contemporary Art Center, Mobile, Alabama, among many others. Her solo exhibition, Generations, will open at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in fall of 2021. Metaferia works has been supported by several artist residencies, including MacDowell, Yaddo, Bemis, Mass MoCA, and Triangle Arts Association. She is a participant of the 2021 Drawing Center's viewing program. Her work has been featured in publications such as Hyperallergic, Artnet News, the Boston Globe, the Washington Post, and San Francisco Chronicle. Helina is currently an Andrew W. Mellon Fellow and assistant professor at Brown University and lives and works in New York City. Welcome, Helina.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you for the warm introduction. And thank you to MOAD, which is where I had my first solo museum show as an emerging artist program awardee in 2017. So I'm so glad to be working with you all again.
You too, and I didn't realize that was your very first solo exhibition. I,
It's
I
my
think
first
I
solo
think you
museum show, yeah.
first solo museum exhibition. I mean, I think ever since then you've just been on a roll, so it almost feels like you've been showing forever. That's really awesome to know. And
Yeah,
and where yeah, where are you joining us from today?
I'm in Los Angeles, downtown LA in the Arts District. I normally live in New York City, but I've been here since December, midway through the pandemic. I came out here just to escape the cold in New York, and then it became projects, and then I was like, oh my God, I'm still here, but I'm here for and I'm like really kind of falling in love with like LA now that everything's opening up more, and kind of getting to see the LA that I didn't get to see initially.
Oh man. Oh, right towards your finish line time.
Yeah.
Cool. So where did you come out to LA for a residency, or was this just simply to just change your perspective and change the location and weather?
Yeah, I came out here with my partner. We were both working on exhibitions, and we decided to. I basically have 4 times the amount of space in LA than I do in my studio in
Mm,
Brooklyn, so it just was a way to do that. And then I ended up working with BLM founders and chapter leaders on a project which we can talk more about, my by way of evolution project. And so for the kind of research and work I was doing, social engagement wasn't really happening during the pandemic, so it just made sense to work with communities that were organizing and activating, and to highlight and amplify their work. And so I'm really excited about the project that I've been working on here. I just get so enriched by activist energy, and working with photographing and being in conversation with Opal Timeti and Melina Abdullah and like Sandy Hudson, like all of these wonderful BLM activists has renewed my spirit. So yeah.
oh wow, that's incredible. Wow. So I mean, I guess you kind of already answered, how this last how this last year has gone for you, with the sheltering in place, but also the movement of Black Lives Matter to the forefront of our national and even international conversations at this point, really. And so, has this last year changed your art in any way, or, do you feel like you've been doing the same thing, but now it appears maybe you have more time to do it?
Well, I had so much time in the beginning of like the pandemic because everything got canceled.com, as I like to say. uh, Everything was like postponed, and I had the first time to sit and like think and just really just do the things I wanted to do, like eat healthy and exercise and all of the stuff that just made me feel like a human and not just a working machine for capitalism. So that was my first
Mm,
half of the pandemic. And then when stuff started to pick back up, well, that plus organizing work. So I was been organizing and doing activism work with different artist and activist communities when I was based in New York and here, including with the Wide Awakes community, which I'll talk more about regarding my current project. And like several other groups. And then it just got slow, and then things started to pick back up for me. People finally saw what the art world would look like in the pandemic. Everything between
mm,
online life, like online shows, public art projects, uh, public facing sort of things that can be done through the hurdle of COVID. So, I mean, I guess we'll go through some of my images too, and you can see how I've dealt with those restrictions. But my
hmm.
work is so inherently social and so inherently like performative, even if it's works on paper, the process is that. So there was definitely a pivot And then coming to LA, also pivoting again, just being geographically in a different place. But I think artists are super adaptable, and I've learned how to land on my feet time and time again, just because I'm in a risky profession of like precariousness. So this is like uncertainty is something I'm very used to. So I was able to adapt pretty easily. Granted, of course, there was like a lot of grief collectively that we're all dealing with, and between the pandemic and economic, crisis, and the movement for Black Lives, and all the numerous things in the news since then. That I mean, if we really look, if we just pause and sit and look at what a year has been, it's been ridiculous. Like it's been amazing.
Yeah.
It's like no Hollywood film could have made it better than what it So yeah, just adapting like everyone else.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So have you continued to teach through this?
I have. I teach at Brown University, and I happen to be on a postdoc, which just means that I only had to teach limited amount anyway. So I'm like teaching one class. I taught one class in the spring, and the reason I was able to come to LA was because that class was virtual. It was already going to be virtual because of the pandemic, so it allowed me some mobility. So I taught sculpture online, which was
Wow.
who
That's
had never done sculpture before, which was very interesting and so amazing, because you really can use anything around you to make your work. Like you really can. And that was just an eye opener, not just to make conceptual work, but just like actual materials that are used in professional grade sculptures. So yeah.
that is incredible. I would love to, kind of like have been, been able to drop in and see some of that because, sculpture is three-dimensional. So I guess that involved a lot of your students getting up and walking around the pieces so that you could see and give feedback, huh?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's a pro at documentation at this point between their phones and their computers. So there's a lot of video and photos in the Google Drive, but we made it.
Nice.
Somehow we bonded, which has been the fun thing, is like finding ways to bond over Zoom,
Hmm.
and create just like intimate experiences through distance. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. I think it also kind of has opened folks up to possibilities most would not be as comfortable with had not this, pandemic forced them to. You're someone who clearly has been very comfortable with all forms of media for a very long time. And, I'm excited to be able to show folks that. Before we do that, I'm just, do you think this would be a good time to kind of do a little walkthrough of your studio space?
I'm gonna try this out. So I am, like everyone, trying to figure out the best ways to use Zoom. So I'm gonna do this on my cell phone. So I'm gonna stop my video and see if I can turn my audio on in my cell phone. So hold on 1 second.
I mean, we love the experimentation. This is like art in action. So awesome.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay.
Yes.
So it worked
Perfect.
out. So I'll just give you a little tour. My studio is also very messy. So I'm trying to I'm a collage artist and video and performance and other things. So I do work with mess in a healthy way, meaning that I need a whole bunch of materials all around me, and then I try to make sense of it. So this is some work that I just finished in my studio, within a couple of months, and I showed it at Free's New York online viewing room, which was a new experience for me. And now I'm about to pack them up, actually, at the end of this week and ship them to all the different locations. But you guys can see them before I pack up my studio. And
Little,
so
little
this is,
preview.
yeah, a little preview. So this is a headdress 17, I think I call it. Yes. So I've been working with, as I said before, BLM, Wide Awakes, and Resistance Revival Chorus, and different activist groups that are within the realm of art and activism for Black lives. And I've been highlighting like Black women, specifically the labor and the care politics of Black women as upholders of democracy in this country. And we could argue internationally. And so I photograph models outside of my studio. And then I go ahead and collage like Black Panther newspapers. I'm gonna show you the details. I work primarily with Black Panther newspapers as relics of the past and documentations of previous civil rights movements, but I also work with other source materials from the African diaspora that I've been collecting really since over the past few years, since 2018. I had a residency at Michigan State University, and I was working there for 9 months, kind of in their critical race theory archives, and that propelled me to start doing research around the country at different library institutions. So they're adorning Black women, they're thinking about legacy, but they're not without scrutinizing the archive. There's definitely a lot of questions that I have about what gets documented and what doesn't get documented, what gets included in history, what's not a part of history, how do people document themselves, and how do they, how does the media portray them, and how does that contrast? And then also, where is the women that are, you know, majority of Black Panther parties, from my understanding, were women, the Black Panther Party and other particular organizations, but the documentation of this sort of isn't held as much as in terms of who's in the forefront. And when Black women are in the forefront, the backlashes that they often get and the lack of protection that they get to this day for political involvement. So that's something that I've been thinking a lot about from a Black feminist lens. I can keep talking, or you can ask me questions, Dimitri.
That's awesome. I am like just taking this all in. Where, you know, how are you sourcing the Black Panther newspapers? Are you photocopying them, or are these the originals?
You guys can see my mess now. Okay, this is what I've tried to hide from people, but this is literally how I work. I work on the floor. I have my socks on so you can see, because I really work on the floor. And I like literally sit with my, you know, my hunchback, which is why I have a yoga mat. And I sit in front of like so many archives that I color code, because I'm obsessed with color. And then I collage from. And so I spend a lot of time reading, but also just looking for imagery. These are replications. So I am a professor at Brown University, and I use every aspect of the institution. So I definitely use their printer, which is one thing that is so great about teaching, free printing. So I work with a research assistant who has actually been sending me the material. So I've been doing the research, archive, you know, photographing, scanning, working with library archivists to scan the documents, and then I photograph them, and then I have these high-res files that my research assistant prints for me at Brown University, and then sends to me here so that I can work from that material. So I like, my process is really like, I start looking at things very formally. And so, I mean, you might not be able to tell, but everything is color coded in these like messy piles that I know where everything is, but nobody else knows kinds of thing. Like a messy room. And then some of them beyond the Black Panther newspapers, I'm working with civil rights photographs, and by photographers, by Black photographers. And then I get to have fun thinking about themes for each of the images. And so I also photograph, like I said, folks in my studio. Some of it's life-size portraiture, just headshots, and some of it's like full-size. And so then I work with all of this material to come up with the aesthetics for the mural. See, try to see if I can give you guys like a real tour. This is Opal Tamati, who's one of the Black Lives Matter founders. This is Ebony Brown.
Wow.
This is for a mural at, Ebony Brown is a Wide Awakes member. This is going to be in a mural through Facebook Open Arts and Art Bridge and We the Culture in New York City, opening for Juneteenth. So it's going to be a huge mural on the side of MoCA, Museum of Contemporary African Diaspora. So this is like, I have to finish this by next week, actually. So this is like me working quickly to finish. Probably take me like a couple of weeks to get it really good before it gets turned into like a vinyl mural. And then this is for like a future collage. So I have so many of these, like, to be honest. I mean, if you really want to see the mess, there's a lot of boxes. If you really want to, I mean, if I really want to be revealing here.
I mean, you're keeping it real. I love it. I love
real.
it. Art is a messy process. I'm always like, when I see a studio that's perfectly manicured, I'm like, how do you work in that? I guess some people can, but
I know my dad will be like, why are you showing everybody how messy your studio is? Anyway, so here's some more work. And this is the one that I already did of Opal, which was yeah, it's a really special one. So this is another one that I had done of Ebony. So I've probably photographed like maybe 30 people so far. I started with students, and then I went into working with activists. I work with students in like performance workshops, performance as protest. And so we think about how somatics, this is Melina Abdullah, by the way, who's the LA chapter leader for BLM. But yeah, we start thinking about like somatics and how to release tension from the body, how to release, stress and trauma from the body. And then I do these very private workshops with students, and then I photograph them as the only relic, like a portraiture as the only relic of that experience, because I keep it really, really private. Institutions support it and they fund it, the workshops, but I noticed that institutions just want so much documentation to say, oh, look at all the smiling people, look at all the and I don't want to give them that. Like I don't play that game. So I photograph them as they want to be seen, and then they trust me with their image. Those volunteer to do it, and then I collage from there, and then the relic is like this sort of fantastical composition. But during the pandemic, I couldn't do all those workshops. I do them now virtually on Zoom, but I couldn't travel and do them. So sure. I started to work with activists who were already embodying that energy that I was summoning. And that's sort of been working out so far.
That's awesome.
So yeah.
Oh my gosh, this is amazing. Every piece is just phenomenal.
This is I guess
we're looking at documentation. Yeah.
We have slides, but I have documentation of like all my other work, which is like performance and video and stuff at MOAD. There's MOAD. Yeah, I don't want to overwhelm you guys with documentation, but I have a whole wall of it, and I always keep that up just so that I can like remember my full practice, because it's not always physical. My practice is also performative. It's video. It's research. It's sculptural things that I don't have out. So I try to like keep a documentation wall for myself to remember my full practice and to think about the through lines and whatever I'm working on at the time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for such a wonderful, thorough tour.
Absolutely.
And including all the messiness, the research.
I know. I'm like, I'm trying to be more vulnerable these days. An affirmation to do that. So I'm going to turn this off and get back on my other computer. Hold on one second.
Yeah, I mean, while you're doing that, I just think it's, the artist practice is so, mystified. Uh-oh.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
I can't, but I think I'm echoing back from the phone. But maybe okay. You got that now.
Sorry. I'm going to leave. Can I leave my other line? Yeah. Are we good? Okay.
Yep, we're good.
Okay. Are you good now?
Okay, cool. Yep. And I have images. I have images to to share as well. So, I just kind of, I guess, you've shown us some of your collage work. You talked about, consulting the archive. How does all that come together for you? Looking at the archive, investigating these histories, and we don't have images from your work that from your exhibition at MOAD, but you did show us a little bit in that one. It almost felt like you were making, I don't know how to put it. There was a lot of mysticism involved in the work, a lot of like divination, and um, the quality of the work had this. It felt ancient, I guess, is kind of the way to say it, and even the materiality that you chose with that, and for folks who don't know, there was like pieces of demolished houses that were local to Oakland, and then you had these little vessels that were almost I don't know what to say it, like medicine basically. Um, so I'm just how does like this current work with the visiting the archives and um, looking at activism of the past and activism of the present, like how do all those connect for you? I don't know if that's too big of a question, but I'm just really curious to know, just kind of like the
Yeah.
sense of place, belonging, and then present day activism, and maybe I just answered it.
I mean, there was definitely a thread with this interest in archival research and research in general. I look at research not just as like academic, heady, book smart stuff, but like embodied research, like experiences, things we store in our DNA, empathy, ways to kind of like other sources of knowledge, right? And I think of them and having an Ethiopian American identity, I think often about African systems of knowledge,
Mhm.
ones that I know from like cultural experiences growing up, but also things that I'm learning and studying and uncovering because I am a diaspora person. I was born in DC, I'm an American, so I don't have the direct connection. So some of it is fabricated realities too, but some of it is like going back to Ethiopia and like kind of thinking about the lifestyle and the ways of knowing within that.
Mhm.
Like spirituality is a form of knowing, or um, so there's this like the performative aspect, which is a way of knowing, like to use the body to think about somatics. That's something that I've been thinking a lot about as a through line in my practice. It's evident in the fact that these bodies of activists are activated through the spectacle of gesture, the performance of a gesture. And that gesture is to be at the front line, to take a risk, to take a stand. And these are the things I just deconstruct with my students when I do those workshops. With the show at MOAD, the knowing or the learning was this like divination that happens where over time, and I wish I do have images, I could bring you some images from my photos, but yeah, I feel like there's a knowing that happens over time, and uncovering, and that came in the form of like a drawing, or that came in the form of
Mhm.
like, the archive in that case was like bricks and wooden flooring from Oakland, housing materials from Oakland. So I think you can make a archive out of anything. I made it out of repurposed, recycled materials. Like to me, assemblage is an archive, right? And it's like something that has
Mhm.
a lived experience, a history within it. It has a life before I knew it. So it's a ready-made, it's a found thing, and then I'm giving it another life. So that's the same thing with collaging for me. Assemblage and collaging are very similar. I find a thing that has a history, that has an information in it. I'm trying to learn more about that thing. That's a thing that's deceased, a thing that's happened already, a history, and then I'm rearranging it and re-articulating it in my own perception of what I've come to know. Oftentimes I learn through research is I don't know anything at the end of it. Like I'm just more questions, right? But the process is intriguing to me, like the process of learning something and growing and evolving with something, whether it's an object or a photograph or so. And I'm also really obsessed with documentation because I work so much with archives. So like I document, make sure all my performances are documented, my video documentation. I'm like obsessed with that because that is the history of the work, right? When I don't have a document of a performance, if I didn't document my own performance, it never happened essentially, right?
Mm.
So I get so like fanatical about that. And I'm also really interested in bookmaking and like what it means to be the author, like authoring your story. So my current collaborations and such are with authors and with like other people who really work with writing and as a tool for remembering. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your
Oh,
questions.
that totally does it. It makes me so much more excited about your process and even thinking about materials, found materials, and kind of relics as an archive. I love that, and so for me, it definitely helps me to kind of see the through lines and the threads of your work and your process, which is you work in so many different media. I mean, we're definitely gonna show folks, but the collage, the assemblage, the performance, the drawing, the videos, the installations, you kind of touch upon everything. And so I guess I'm going to kind of jump ahead and I'm just, really curious to know when, you know, an artist who's so adept at so many different forms of art making, how do you go about deciding whether, something needs to be a performance or it needs to be, a two-dimensional piece or three-dimensional or all the how do you know which way to pull from your toolbox?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think I I started off completely as a painter. Like when I was an undergrad and after undergrad for several years, I worked just as a painter, and that was the tool that I was like, I'm going to master painting. And then I realized I didn't want to master a medium. I wanted to quote unquote master, and that's a journey, right? To really know something again and again. I didn't think it was the repetition of doing one thing over and over that creates mastery for me. I think mastery that I want to understand is like life, the human condition. Like
Mm,
there's bigger things that I wanted to understand, that it wasn't about a medium. The medium was just a tool to get me there. So then I realized that what is the best way to articulate and to kind of pinpoint an idea, that for me, it opened me up into new genres. It opened me up into, the immediacy of performance versus the slowness of waiting for paint to dry. What does it mean to articulate something in a medium that incorporates 40 time and real experiences and touch and smell, and rather than something that is mostly visual, right? That you're told not to,
mm,
that it hangs in the wall. How
mm,
can you articulate that? And the truth is I cannot master every single medium, but I can collaborate and I can work with others. At the show at MOAD, I did a performance where I invited Zina Carlota, who's a Bay Area musician, to activate with sound, and she got me to sing, and I'm not a singer, but I did it because I like her, and I was like, I'm gonna do this for you, but yeah, I mean, sound is an amazing vibration, and I can't always do the thing that I want to do, but I can figure out through installation or through performance or through video how to incorporate sound. Um, and at the end of the day, it's about conversations, and that's another medium for me, is like facilitating a dialogical experience, like facilitating something where people feel like they can talk about something difficult, that they can talk about
mm.
something necessary. Art is not meant to solve problems. I think that would be very naive of us to think that. I think arts can offer a way for us to like get to a conversation or get to solving a problem. But art in itself is it's like a gateway. It's like,
Mm.
and there was a friend of mine who said something really great, which was like, it's in one of my videos. She talked about artists as prophets, of seeing the future,
Ooh,
of like a
ooh,
vision
I love
that
that.
the rest of the world hasn't kind of seen yet, of like a way of being. When I look at film, or when I look at like, or hear like Sun Ra, for example, or like, just really get into a certain artist's headspace, I'm like, they're ahead of their time. They are doing something,
Yes, for
you know,
sure.
that's like, yeah, that's just like, the world doesn't have to be what we've constructed it to be based on our regiments and policies and systems that have been constructed that are oppressive. Like the world could be something new. And I think art can help foster that change.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Can I, on that note, because I always don't get to everything that I want to, but I want to show some images so we can start talking about them.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
Okay.
just give me 1 second, and I think I just have to hide these controls. Good. Okay, awesome. Oh no, what happened? My controls are gone entirely. Okay, maybe that's I was gonna try something a little different in how in how I go about doing this, but I don't know if it's gonna work for me today. Oh, there you go. Okay, cool. Awesome. And you can see the image on my screen. Okay, awesome. So, this thank you so much also for curating the images. I really appreciate that. Most artists don't go through the process of like, let's walk you through, a set of images and videos, and I'm really excited you sent all those to me. So, in on your wall, we saw all of these images of, I don't know if you call them crowns, but I interpret them as some kind of crowns or something coming out of the head. Um, but they're just busts, or just the heads. With this image, this very first one that you sent, it's the entire body. um, and I'm interested in the process that you go through, um, in creating a work like this.
Yes. So I kind of showed you guys a lot of it. I mean, it starts with those. This is a former student of mine, Asia Moore,
Okay.
at Michigan State University, and I can't remember if she participated in the workshops, but usually the students are participating in some sort of performances, protest workshops. It's like a couple hours, and it gets very intimate. There's a lot of tears. We talk about institutional oppression within an institutional space, and it's open for BIPOC women, those who identify both cis and trans as BIPOC women, and that is already sets up a different kind of space. Like, when do predominantly PWI spaces, predominantly white spaces, when do they really host a space that's really for BIPOC women? So, so I photograph them as a relic of that experience. And then I print. And so the collecting in the archives actually takes so long. Like, that's a big part of the experience for me, is the research. And when it think about how long it takes to do one of these pieces, I can't even measure it in like a constructive like hours or days or weeks, because it takes
Uh-huh.
like years to get to actually do this.
Wow.
The workshop itself takes so much energy. Or even if I'm working with an activist, like, it takes time to build that relationship to a point of trust where they start to trust me with their stories and their image and their bodies. So like, that never gets calculated in like how long it takes to do something. And then developing an aesthetic and a language, a visual aesthetic, has taken me, I would say a lifetime. but then the stuff that you see in the studio right now, that's like, to me, I don't want to say it like this, it's like the easy part. It's like the assembly of my vision, but the vision took years
Hmm.
to make. Like, the vision is for me, if we're going to be honest, it's like Black women being respected and free and empowered and assertive, and not the mules of society. And and that's from a diasporic lens, that does not limit to the Americas. So like, that vision is ongoing. And I'm like, through the research of like Sadia Hartman, or like like really just kind of looking at other artists who've articulated that, like, all of that is in the work. But and yet
Hmm.
there's a lot of actual physical pieces in the work, but it's like, yeah. So anyway, to walking me through making this is like it's like
Yeah,
a whole
it's
thing.
a journey and a process. Like, how much of your subject's personal story, gets incorporated into the elements that you decide to add into the collage, or are you conceiving it, you know, the vision? I mean, because this piece, it goes outside of the figure. I mean, it's layers upon layers upon layers. So just kind of wonder, when you're going through the construction of this, are you taking into into account this person's story and then kind of illustrating this, or, you know,
I'm
if you
taking
don't
into
mind
account
walking through kind of that
when I
process.
ask them to model for it, then we have that conversation. Like I kind of like lead them through like a quick meditation and like a very quick, like the psyche of what you want to evoke. And then I say to like, we
Wow.
talk a lot about embodied gestures, like how to communicate something through a gesture, right? With the students, we do that. With the BLM activists, they came ready. Like I didn't have to tell them nothing. First of all, they know media, they know they're sad. They're using media very strategically, like whether it's social media to further their movement, right? Like BLM started as a hashtag. So, you know, like they came ready. I didn't have to do anything. I was like,
Yeah.
learning.
Yeah.
That's what I love is like working with people with varieties of experiences. Like there's some people that are naturally more self-conscious. So the process of like walking them through a photo session like this, you know, it takes a lot of like, you know, coaching. And then there's some people who it's like they were born to model their confidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really, I try to communicate those things through the gesture. And then, you know, I think that there's a risk of, and I hate using this like art school thing that a lot of artists of color get labeled as, but like being didactic, like being too much of a narrative, being like, there's
Hmm.
always the
Hmm.
risk when you're working with figures and imagery and archives of like telling too much of the story. So what I try to do with these collages is I try to think about what it takes, like the process of research is not knowing, right? And you're trying to find something, you're trying to uncover, and it's not always there. So like by covering and obscuring the faces of the people in the crowns, or you know, hiding some of the text when there's text involved.
Hmm.
There's certain things that I'm doing to not give you everything, so that you have to work to find that information. And even then, you may not fully know. Like we don't know. I try to have very good citations of all my works to know everything that I'm sourcing, but I don't know all the people in the work. Like I don't know, there's a lot of things that are unknown. And then to really analyze a photograph, especially an archival photograph, it's almost like fictional. Like there's so much
Hmm.
like you have to make up to understand or project onto something to understand a photograph that was taken 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago. And in that play of mythology, that's where I want to sit with my work, like that ride between history and mythology and fiction and fantastical and like real activists and real people, and what we project onto people and what they want to exude. So there's like this play between our consciousness, theirs, and I hope that comes across in the work. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. This just is helping me to, again, layers upon layers upon layers. I love your practice, and in this conversation I'm like, I love it even more. Want to go into, you know, this image is just one of my favorites, of them all. And you showed it to us on the wall, but I mean, I think it's definitely worth looking at it on a larger scale and looking at it a little bit more closely. There's just something about the placement of her hands, how you chose to kind of isolate the arms, and have the, I don't know, I aesthetically just absolutely love this piece to death. And so yeah, if you could just talk a little bit more about it. I think you've walked through, I think you've walked us through, a lot of the process, but I guess maybe some of the thought process behind this piece.
Yeah. So the model for this is Erin Maya, who's a singer for Resistance Revival Chorus. And the process for this piece, I mean, the imagery is Black Panther newspapers. And I mean, there's some obvious overt like colors going on.
Yes.
And so this idea of like what it means to be American, you know, really started coming up for me. I was making this. To be honest, like I can't make something unless I really feel committed to the story, the narrative, and like it doesn't move me. And like when I was making this work, I think it was the first one that I had made since the uprisings last summer, like in the series. I mean, I was making the series since, you know, 2019 or 2018 or so, but like this is the first one from the series that I made. And I was getting emotional. Like it was like, I don't know. I think like all that's, we can't experience all these things through the pandemic and not be affecting
Hmm.
us. Like we'd have to like be a sociopath to not, you know, have some empathy for what's going on in the world. And, you know, I just felt like it was my way of dealing with what I was experiencing between, I mean, the horrible ways in which we are consuming, but the necessary ways too, because it is helping us to make civil rights movement changes of how we consume Black death as spectacle, you know, and
Oh my goodness,
about like
yes.
George Floyd and thinking about Breonna Taylor and thinking about like so many folks who, you know, like, anyway, this piece to me felt like what it is to be an American. It felt like the complexities of it. It felt like, you know, I too am that, you know, as an Ethiopian American, Erin Maya is that, as, you know, an African American who, you know, has this other type of lineage to this country. And, you know, and that, like, that's not, that doesn't mean that we all have the same, we're not viewed the
Hmm.
same in the justice system, you know, and I'm sure that everybody has a personal story, like these things aren't like somebody out there in the news and, you know, whatever city, something happened to them violent. Like somebody here in this room knows or is a Black man who's gone through something with the police, right? Like, or is a Black woman who's gone through, like, these aren't like distant things. And so I started thinking about
Exactly.
all of those personal things that I know about, of, you know, just talking with cousins who've gone through stuff with the police, and just like, and it just all like sort of was like, my impetus was like, what does it mean for us to claim and reclaim a history, you know, where it's built on stolen land, it's built upon the labor of Black folks, and yet there's this consistent denial because of the institutional systems that are in place. So I mean, I'm sure you can feel that too, but like that to me was my cathartic. And of course, there's still more that I have to say. I'm like, I'm not done. One Piece can't get it out.
Yeah, yeah.
There's more.
And speaking of that, I mean, your work takes, I'm going to jump around here a little bit, takes some different forms. I'm super excited about, you know, seeing a billboard with one of these pieces on it. And, you know, where was this located? You know, what was part of this project? I see Save Art Space, but
Yeah, so it was put together by Save Art Space, which is a nonprofit based in New York, and Art at a Time Like This, which is a nonprofit. I think they came up during the pandemic. It was a curated project. There were like maybe 20 artists who all got billboards, like Dred Scott and Sue Coe and Abigail DeVille, like just a whole bunch of like amazing folks. And I was happy to be one of the artists included in the curatorial project. So one of my headdresses, one of my collages got transformed into this billboard. And after this billboard, it's still up in the Bronx. I mean, that was
oh,
when
wow.
cancel.com. And I was like, you know, like, okay, I don't know how I'm gonna make work when all my stuff is so like social practice and performance. And like the idea of like make it public facing really started to spark interest for me. I used to do murals like back in the day after undergrad in DC. I did like 20 murals in the DC area, and I had forgotten about the wonderful feeling of public art. Like it really does feel
Mm,
like there's an enrichment that I can get that I can't always get in the white cube space. So that was another reason that I wanted to do this big mural. Actually, there's two murals in NYC that are coming up in June, in time for Juneteenth. There's going to be, if anyone's in NYC, there's a big celebration we're planning for this mural at MoCA with the Wide Awakes community. But that was my impetus for like doing that mural. I forgot to show you, but like right behind me, I don't know if you could see it. That big piece over there.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's one of the murals. It's going to be in the Bronx. I didn't get up close on that. I totally missed that one, but yeah. So like the ability to like take one of my images and turn them in on vinyl or wheat paste, or like, you know, like make them 16 feet. Make them. I mean, this was like 14
Wow, wow.
by like 48 feet. You know what I mean? I just love, I mean, the thing is, it's unexpected. And like, I try to make my work affirming, you know, like
Hmm.
affirmations.
Hmm.
So yeah, public facing work has been something that I'm like low key obsessed with right now because it's like, it does all the things I want it to do. And it does it in community.
It's the perfect time for that. Just because we're short on time, I'm gonna jump into a couple of pieces because I definitely thank you for sending some of the video, but I want to definitely share with folks some of the video works. Um, so I think this is the very first one that I have. Where is that?
if we could take a moment and realize and think about all of the times that someone said something to us that carried us through.
Wow.
And then if we sit in that and accept our power to deliver the same thing to someone,
Yes.
we would deliver it more often. Don't think about like how big it will be. Our families are who they are on the macro because of all of the people around them that worked on the micro. That's
And yeah, I just wanted to do a quick excerpt of that one and pair it along with the photograph. And so, yes, can you please talk about this amazing project with all the amazing ancestors surrounding them?
So this is part of the Same by Way of Revolution series, which um, my collages are part of, which is all about, you know, social movements of the past informing our current everyday moment. And this was actually screened at MoAD. I don't know if you knew that, but it was in the Still Here exhibit, which was curated.
Oh, I think I missed that one. Shoot.
So that was like last year's thing. It was at MoAD. I think it was maybe 2019 or something. Dexter Wimberly, Larry Osimensa, and Quintero Davis, sorry. Kiara Ventura, I believe, was the curators. So this work is about 17 minutes long. It's basically a day that I spent organizing and, you know, recording and descendants of prominent civil rights leaders in Baltimore, Maryland. Milani Douglas and Ashira Douglas, who are Frederick Douglass's descendants, Dick Gregory's daughter, Ayanna Gregory, and James Baldwin's sister, Ms. Paula Whaley. And so we gathered at Ms. Paula Whaley's home and then at Fells Point, which is one of the oldest slave ports in the country in Baltimore, for a moment of like talking about all the matriarchs in their family who did not, they did not get the same sort of recognition or attention, but were instrumental in the civil rights movement. And so like anecdotes and stories about that, but also like their vision as Black women descendants of, you know, for like where we are in this moment and beyond. It's an oral history piece. It reads more like a mixture of song, art, spoken word, talking conversations. And I meant it to be like a living room, like it's kind of one of those things you do with your girlfriends when you get together on a Sunday and you're just like talking and you're like, you know, sipping tea or whatever and just sharing and relating. And my hope was that people felt like they were a part of that too, because one thing that Milani talks about in that video is that it takes everyone, documented and undocumented, and like just because somebody's documented and archived doesn't mean that those stories that aren't documented weren't pivotal for change. So
Oh my gosh, this is awesome. And I know Sade is just smiling from ear to ear. She puts together a program called Art as We See It, which investigates the archive and digs up a lot of these untold stories. You know, even if we don't know anything about them. So I know she's got to be super excited about that right now. Your work is awesome, and it just makes sense in the context of museums, also, who are often, you know, the holders of the archive and the tellers of these stories, you know, and even just kind of some of the stuff you were talking about where the archive, you know, the images have a little bit of a fiction to them, you know, even just thinking about, I don't know if you've looked into just thinking about the titles of some of the images that are contained in archives, the lack of telling people's names and just, you know, just the thought of who they were or lack of thought to who they were, that's so present in the archive. I don't know if you're going that far back necessarily or
no,
um,
I definitely am thinking a lot about it. One thing I'll say is that the murals I'm doing for the program in New York City in June, I'm also thinking about monuments too. So I'm turning some of the
yes.
collages into monuments with pedestals and everything, and thinking about what
Wow.
other forms of what like basically what it means to not just archive something, but memorialize something. And then
Hmm.
can you memorialize an everyday person who isn't necessarily famous, but isn't a Black woman activist, right? Like, can we do that and be okay with their labor being upheld. Like who get, what is the vetting process for those things? When is, there's nothing more that says white and male more than like these monuments that are erected for slave owners. You know what I mean? Like it says like, this is the standard of what should be valued in this country. And so how can we pivot that on its head? So yeah, I think a lot about that, like who gets that, that recognition.
I'm gonna jump into a couple others before we jump to audience Q&A. So I just love this, and I couldn't not play this one.
Home means anywhere I lay my head. Freedom means accessing the world for me without any inhibitions, without any setbacks, without any restrictions, without any limitations.
Place where I go to escape from the world. It's like a nest. Place to regroup. It's like to be a black man in America is to be more cognizant of the decisions you make, because self-expression is policed more by other black men, black women, other people's self-expression could end your life. Just naturally being you seen as a threat. Your body is inherently political. It's inherently aggressive. It's inherently problematic. Being a black man in America is one of the dopest experiences any human being could have. The ability to see, to really see. Really see what it means to be American.
It gives me chills. I just love that project. So yes, and this I understand is part of a much larger project.
Yeah, it's a 22-minute video art piece, multi-channel, and it's called Middle Passage for Dreams. I shot it over a 3-year period all over the country, and there's 5 chapters that happen in different seasons around the country with different groups of people. And it's really a slow cinema experience about reclaiming the image space, the moving image space, reclaiming narrative, instead of all the spectacles of death that we see, for it to be about us affirming who we are, our thoughts. Some of the language is esoteric. None of it is scripted. It's all improv, which is how I usually work. So this was shown at, these are images, the last 2 images are shown images of how it was installed public facing again. So my last show, solo show at NYU, Gallatin Galleries near Washington Square Park, was in the windows of the galleries, public facing, and there were speakers installed in the windows so that you could hear from the street. And then also, and it was turned into a 6-channel, so you could see it really big from afar, but then also there were these monitors up close that you could see it. There was also subtitled for accessibility. So it was really another thing I said, like I was saying, I'm obsessed with public facing right now because you could see it 24 hours. It was on a loop. So the conversation was ongoing for like 3 months. And you could see it in the winter and the snow, then it was turning into spring, and then you could see it. So the seasons kind of reflected, outdoors reflected what was happening on the screen where the seasons were changing, and it was very cyclical. And it was interesting because when I did the artist talk for this, the person, I was in conversation with Steve Locke, who's another artist based in New York. And he was asking like, well, why 22 minutes? I don't want the project to stop. I want it to keep going. And I was saying, actually, it does go on. It goes on for 3 months. You know, it's like a conversation. And so, yeah. And so like, I think that was the main shift for me. It was like, yeah, as you said before, with my work, it makes sense for it to be at a museum or an institution because it's dealing with archives and that's where these things are held. But the really interesting ways of knowing aren't necessarily in an institution. In fact, there oftentimes institutions are very slow, and especially academia, and and like how we don't always get things right. So, and they weren't even designed for people of color, like Black people, Black women. So there's a lot that gets lost, and it doesn't get archived. And so these public-facing sort of opportunities for me are a way to mine institutional funds, if I'm going to be very honest, but like, because these things have to get produced somehow, but also make it for a greater audience where, I mean, when I was young, I wasn't going to museums all the time when I was growing up in the DC area. Although I did go to the Smithsonian's because they were free sometimes for school. I got my art knowledge from public art, right? Like that was how I learned. And that was one day I was like, I want to do that, And so it's a way to kind of inspire and facilitate conversations with like folks who just were going to work that day and they didn't expect to see this. They were waiting for their bus or going to the train or whatever. And then they're all of a sudden in having this moment where they're confronted with something that makes them think and feel in a different type of way.
I love it. One more before we jump into the audience Q&A. There's another shot of that, I guess, during the winter time. Snow piled up, but yes, I could not skip this one.
And this is for the women that will come forward after all of them. The women today, our children, our grandchildren, and those after that.
And I've definitely noticed the roses as a recurring icon, I guess, throughout your work. But yeah, I the video, the performance pieces, the photography, the color, like everything. You do everything, and you do it really well. But yeah, aside from this just being visually and auditorily beautiful in a public space, clearly during the pandemic because everyone's masked up. Yeah, tell us about this piece, please, and then I'll jump into audience Q&A.
This is a good piece to kind of end on too. So like this was one of my ancestral honoring performances, and I've done a few of them over the years since about 2014. And they mostly been in institutional spaces or in gallery spaces. But this again pandemic, you know,
Yeah.
do it outside because that wasn't happening in 2020. So on the a white woman's right to vote in this country was celebrated with the centennial of August 18th, 2020. And on that day, the Wide Awakes, which is an artist activist community that again, I've been affiliated with and a part of, we organized something in Grand Army Plaza in Brooklyn, basically an activation day. And my performance was within that event. And I honored Black women suffragettes who did not receive the same right to vote until, I think it's like 1965. Get back to that.
Definitely in the 60s. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I called forward with the archive of a photograph. I called forward the name and sort of evoked through bodily gesture. Again, this way of connecting and knowing through the body, and did a walk for people, for each person that I could name. It was a Black woman suffragette who didn't, when 100 years ago, when white women were given that right to vote, they too did not have that right to vote. So they were still fighting. So just honoring that it's a continued struggle, even within feminism, even within, from an intersectional perspective, it's an ongoing struggle, and to make sure that we're not just one is free, not just two is free, but that we're all free, right? So the liquid in the bowl was like a mixture of juices to think about blood. This is a reoccurring thing that I do, is like especially I remember like at museums, like maybe I don't remember if this happened at MoAD, but people are always like, oh, liquid, we can't have it in a museum. And usually try to keep those kinds of things that feel blood-like. And then the ground is full of canvas. And so it feels like a painting. So in a way, I'm still painting all these years later, but with my whole body. So that's this particular work.
Oh my gosh, that is incredible. And it looks like we have lots of comments. I unfortunately was not able to see them before. Sorry, y'all. So, oh my gosh. There's there's a lot in the comments that I'll definitely let you go to. And thank you so much today for putting all of the links into the chat. But I do see that we have a question in the Q&A, so I will go to that, and then I'll go through while you're answering some of what's inside of chat. But Adetola asks or says, beautiful work, Helina. Can you speak to how residencies have supported or informed your work, such as feedback, critique, or just having a space to be creative?
Yeah, so I have done a lot of artist residencies. When I finished with my MFA in 2015 at Tufts University, actually I got a teaching fellowship to teach at the San Francisco Art Institute. And then I never thought I could do a residency because I always thought that like you needed, like who has the time to do that, or, like, I don't know. So I ended up getting obsessed with them because on the summer of teaching, I got into my first one or two, I think it was like Skowhegan or something like that. And
only one of the most prestigious of all.
First residency. It took like a couple of applications, by the way, but I got mine in and it happened and I went. And then I realized, oh my God, like my work was getting transformed, and I felt like, I just felt so supported. Like they were cooking my food for me. I was like, oh my God, I can make my art. And I actually got the MoAD show while I was at Skowhegan, and I started to brainstorm that show and play with whatever it really was a result of my time at Skowhegan, interestingly enough. So it was just time and space to think. And so in between teaching, like when I was not teaching, when I had gaps, I would just like do residencies. And then I started stringing them along and living out of my suitcase for like a few years. I still do them, but I guess I'm in LA, like kind of like a residency right now. Now I'm like making my own up. But I like the idea of just like having that concentrated time. And I guess the question was like, how does it inform, right? Like, how does it inform my work? I mean, to be honest, I have to thank all the institutions that did support and organizations that did support me, because, I guess I couldn't be the artist that I am today without those supports and funding. And I mean, MoAD, like that emerging artist program, was really instrumental for me. And so for those who are applying and thinking about applying to residencies, I get rejected all of the time, but you just get a thick skin and you just keep going and you just keep building relationships with people, and somebody will put faith in you. If you keep making good work, this is what Daoud Bey had said once, like if you keep making good work and keep showing it to enough people, especially the right people, something's gonna happen. Like if you just have to trust and put something cannot, like there's no way that something can't happen if you just keep doing it. It just might take some time. So timing is everything.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, we are gonna have some young artists watching this. Thank you so much for that. Ekaterina asked, do you have a group of like-minded artists around you?
I do. I think that's kind of why I have been living, I mean, after residencies for a while, living with all those different artists every single day, I learned that I'm pretty much like, I need to be in art community, and living in New York, being here in LA, like I found community for sure. But like-minded, for me, it's been like artist activist communities. So the Wide Awakes group was founded by Hank Willis Thomas and Jose Parla and Eric Gottsman, and through the Four Freedoms community. And there's so many great artists. It's open source. Anybody could be a Wide Awake, like literally anyone can join. This is not, and there's Bay Area chapters and stuff like that. It's not like a coveted group or anything like that. Like, so I feel like I think open source is another thing I like when it's not like this like hierarchical thing. And yeah, and like social practice artists, there's so many great folks. I'm gonna shout out some in the Bay Area. Christy Chan is like amazing. She's doing something with the Chinese American, I think museum or something like that in the Asian in the Bay Area coming soon. Like she just forwarded me something, but she's freaking amazing. One of my peoples, Jody Woods. Oh my God, there's so many great social practice artists that I love, like all over the country. And I think people who are committed to community, and not in like a superficial way, like I just need to get this grant money, but like like through and through, are like really about service. Like I've gravitated to that. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, we are at the end of our time, and so how can people follow you? How can they, how can they see what's up next for you?
Yeah, I mean, this has been great. Thank you, Dimitri.
Thank you so much for joining.
Well. And I'm so happy to do this with you all. And feel free to follow me on Instagram, I guess. It's just my name, Helina.Metaferia. And I have my website. You can reach out, like, if you want to be on my mailing list or something, that's an option. I try to do those a couple times a year. And I think, yeah, just like if you see me around, like, let's connect. So.
Awesome. And then just a reminder, the next show, because you have a show coming up very, very soon.
Oh my gosh. Yes, I have the mural. So Juneteenth is also, if you're in New York City, starting at 3 p.m.-ish, I can't hold me to that time, but if you follow me on Instagram, I'll definitely be promoting it. We'll be doing a huge Wide Awakes processional. I don't want to give away too much details, but it's going to be a big party. Sure. It starts at MoCA, and it's going to be throughout downtown Brooklyn, and I'm so excited about that. Like a whole takeover, and the mural is going to be activated. So there's that happening. I have a group show at CF Hill in Sweden and Stockholm opening up in a couple of weeks, and at the Art and Culture Center in Hollywood, Florida, in a couple of weeks. So those are a couple places. And then my solo museum show in the fall. So yeah, at the Museum of Fine Arts will be up. Yeah.
Okay, so you have a ton going on.
Yeah, I have a few things. Awesome. I have a few things.
Yes.
That's why my studio is messy right now. Because
it seems like no matter where you are, there's one pretty close to where you are as well. So, awesome. Helina, thank you so much. You are phenomenal, and I just love to see your career skyrocketing. It's amazing. And then the depth of your practice has just blows my mind. I'm so impressed by you.
Thank you, and thank you for all the support to Moad, to Emily, and to everybody and the whole staff, Elizabeth, everyone.
All right. Well, have a great one, and I'll be looking for you on Instagram.
All right. Take care. Bye.
All right, Helina. Bye, everyone.